What does healthy really mean? Which is worse, no food or bad food? The answer might seem obvious, but it's not. In fact, when I asked José Graziano da Silva, the former Director General of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, part of the WHO, located in Rome, he didn't have an answer, and for good reason. The pains of hunger are real and acute, but the pains associated with limb amputation and burning in your toes, peripheral neuropathy, from type 2 diabetes can be likewise incapacitating. No food is usually the result of upheavals such as drought, floods, war, or pandemics. The FAO estimates 140 million people were starving worldwide in 2019. And this is increasing to 270 million in 2020 because of COVID-19. This social upheaval is heart-wrenching, but it's a statistic that might move people to action and donation, as there's a resulting imperative to improve. On the other end of the spectrum, bad food isn't the result of upheavals, as it's been engineered to be insidious. It's very bad chronically, as it is the cause of NCDs, social disparities, healthcare collapse, mental health crises, societal devolution, and in time an even greater risk for social upheaval. Ultimately, even more people die, just slower, and it's under the wire, as the cause isn't as clear, so no one does anything about it, and it only gets worse. In addition, bad food puts you at increased risk of getting seriously ill or dying from COVID-19. See Chapter 13. You don't know you're dying until it's too late. You don't know why, and you and society have racked up untoward medical, productivity, societal, and environmental costs in the process. Nutrition versus nutritionism. Nutrition is the most important and malleable factor influencing people's lifespan, how long we live, and health span, how well we live. Studies on fraternal versus identical twins show that genetics account for 25 to 30% of a person's longevity. The other 70 to 75% proves that while favorable genetics clearly play a role, the environment, including a bad diet, can easily overcome those gifts. Hence why the U.S. has seen reduced life expectancy 4 years in a row. It's impossible to specifically calculate what percentage of someone's lifespan is attributable to nutrition. But given what's happened to chronic disease incidence, prevalence, and severity statistics over the last 50 years, food plays a huge role. It always has. But what is it about the food? Everyone has a theory, but very few facts. And those facts are being ignored by various stakeholders in order to tout their own ideas and advance their own agendas. That includes the public. See Chapter 12. Because everyone's a nutrition expert. After all, each and every human is their own N of 1. That is, they have their own experience as to what worked or didn't work for them. But they have no idea of what works for you. Since the publication of The Omnivore's Dilemma, 2006, food journalist Michael Pollan has made the point that nutrition is religion because it requires believing without seeing. After all, nutrition must be all about what's in the food. With the discovery of the first vitamin, B1 or thiamine, in 1912, scientists became convinced that there were chemicals in food that conferred health, so there must also be chemicals in food that conferred illness. This in turn has led to the concept of nutrients as being the lowest common denominator for any eating paradigm, giving rise to the religion of nutritionism. This is the procedure that the dietitians and the food industry have been promulgating for decades. Just add up the good stuff and the bad stuff and call it science. It's how we got the FDA food label, see Chapter 24, which empowered the plethora of nutritional pundits on YouTube and Reddit and Medium. You don't have to have an advanced degree to be a nutritionist, which means that everyone is a nutritionist. And this has given rise to faith over science, because nutritionism is about zealotry. The Knights of the Dinner Table. Every nutritional pundit has a drug to sell if they have money to invest in it to bring it to market. Otherwise, they have a supplement to sell, or at worst case, a diet. On their late-night televised infomercials or on YouTube, they offer N=1 testimonials as to the power of their diet in reversing disease. All anecdote, no data. Sometimes these infomercials are disguised as documentaries in order to make them look fair and balanced. Look, if a movie maker is making a documentary about diet and health, the opposite viewpoint must at least make an appearance at some point. Check out the latest fodder on vegan diets. For instance, Forks Over Knives, 2011, or The Game Changers, 2018, and find any mention of alternatives. I've had my own public run-in with Kip Anderson and protein-phobic Dr. Garth Davis, the director and talking head, over their scaremongering movie What the Health, 2017. An egg is the same as 5 cigarettes? And all I can say is there wasn't any science offered in explanation, either in the movie or in the debate. But it's true on the other side of the street as well. Check out The C Word, 2016, a story with an N of 1 that extols the benefits of a ketogenic diet for cancer, and The Magic Pill, 2017, which lauds dietary fat. No mention of any alternatives. Nutritional mythology has never been more fervent than it is now, in part because lifespan and health span are declining. Everyone wants to blame someone or something, including me. But it has to be done with science. Otherwise, nutrition is no better than hydroxychloroquine, just hearsay. It's time to adjust the current paradigm. Developed world, Kwashiorkor. In order to understand how diet affects our 8 pathologies and 3 enzymes, you need to understand the difference between nutrient deficiency and excess. If we feed a healthy individual with the right amount of calories per day, say 2,500 to 3,000, but provide only sugar as the food source, say 700 grams per day, that person will exhibit weight loss and not survive more than 2 to 3 weeks. In contrast, as we saw in the documentary Super Size Me, 2004, by Morgan Spurlock, the same number of calories supplied as processed food rapidly devolves into massive weight gain, with miserable and adverse health outcomes. It's more than enough calories in both cases. One caused weight loss and the other weight gain, but both put health at risk. As Mr. Spurlock developed nutrient excess energy, he also became nutrient deficient, micronutrients. Nutrient deficiency diseases can bear striking resemblances to nutrient excess diseases. Recall 2 different diseases made known to the public in the 1960s as the U.S. attempted to solve the malnutrition epidemic in Africa: marasmus and Kwashiorkor. Marasmus babies are skin and bones. They don't get enough to eat and suffer from protein and calorie deficiency. This is what happens if you consume straight sugar for 3 weeks. Sugar alone, without any nutrients, can even be absorbed from the intestine. Kwashiorkor is a different disease, resulting from protein deficiency without calorie deficiency. These babies have huge bellies because their livers are filled with fat. They've got non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, NAFLD. What caused the fatty liver? Cassava flour, a high-carbohydrate, low-fiber food resulting in glycation, oxidative stress, mitochondrial dysfunction, insulin resistance, poor membrane integrity, and inflammation. See Chapter 7. In other words, they have developing world metabolic syndrome. Well, guess what? We have instead developed world kwashiorkor. People with metabolic syndrome are frequently both overnourished and undernourished. They consume plenty of calories, but they are also deficient in rare amino acids like tryptophan, needed to make serotonin, and methionine, needed to make glutathione, the liver antioxidant. They're deficient in micronutrients once the grains have been stripped of their germ, location of the vitamins, polyphenols, and minerals. Another disease explains the dissociation of overnutrition and obesity with metabolic syndrome. This disease, called lipodystrophy, is a disorder of subcutaneous fat production. Because people with lipodystrophy don't make fat cells, they are not obese. Rather, any extra energy ends up as ectopic fat in the liver and muscle, which leads to all the diseases of metabolic syndrome. Whether people get lipodystrophy has nothing to do with calories. No surprise, whether people get metabolic syndrome has nothing to do with calories. In each case, it has to do with whether the liver mitochondria is working right to process the energy to keep itself healthy. And in kwashiorkor, lipodystrophy, and metabolic syndrome, those mitochondria are not working right, leading to those 8 subcellular pathologies. See Chapter 7. That's what chronic disease is really all about. Nutritional naysayers. There are several reasons why these truths took a back seat to mythology, and why the science of nutrition took a wrong turn in favor of zealotry. First of all, most pundits in the field aren't bench scientists or clinicians. They tend to be nutritional epidemiologists, and nutritional epidemiology has significant limitations. Epidemiology means correlation, not causation. Like John Snow's cholera Broad Street pump exercise, see Chapter 2, nutritional epidemiology studies are discovery, and discovery can be very important in posing the questions that truly need answering. However, it almost never answers the questions by itself. You need to design a proper study to answer them. See below. Just because A is associated with B, does that mean that A causes B? Or could it be reverse causality? B causes A. Or could it be intermediate causality? C causes A or B. Could it be irrelevant? C is associated with B and D causes A. As an example, ice cream consumption correlates with frequency of drownings. Does that mean eating ice cream causes you to drown? Or do survivors of the drowned victim bury their sorrows in a baked Alaska? More likely, we eat ice cream when it's hot. We swim when it's hot. And some unfortunate people drown when they swim. Correlation does not automatically imply a cause and effect relationship. But the media, in its effort to sell newspapers or snatch eyeballs, treats almost all epidemiological studies as causation. Therefore, the public doesn't understand the difference either. Some investigators and news sources tout meta-analyses, an attempt to conglomerate multiple studies. It's the gold standard to prove your point, and meta-analyses can do this well, when the individual studies are independent of industry and are also scientifically sound. But many such analyses are GIGO, garbage in, garbage out, as they are only as good as the data they're based on, and when the food industry is in charge, the results are suspect. Another reason why nutrition remains an academic backwater is because we don't have good biomarkers, for example blood tests, that measure what people are actually eating. Most of the data in nutritional studies are obtained through memory recall to food questionnaires. You can see for yourself. Try asking someone what they've eaten for the last 3 days. Most people can't tell you what they've eaten in the last 3 hours, which doesn't even factor in that sometimes people lie, not always intentionally, but perhaps they put on rose-colored glasses when it comes to memory recall. For example, Leanne Birch at Penn State University asked a group of 11-year-old girls what they ate, and videotaped them while they ate it. She then divided up the group into weight tertiles: thin, normal weight, overweight, and showed that the thin and normal weight kids reported correctly, while the overweight kids underestimated the candy, soda, and desserts that they ate, except for one item. They reported their juice intake correctly because they thought juice was healthy. We'll deal with juice more fully in Chapter 19. Dr. John Ioannidis, an internist and accomplished statistician from Stanford University, has proposed that we do away with nutritional epidemiology entirely, as the studies are impossible to control, the data is perennially abused, and the results are virtually guaranteed to be wrong. I disagree. There's no doubt that people read too much into these studies, but they also need to be educated. No single nutrition epidemiology study is ever the final word, because they don't rise to the level of causation. There are only two types of studies that can approach the rarefied air of causation. One, called econometric analysis, looks at the natural history of both consumption and disease prevalence, but also accounts for both confounders and for time. Time is essential to causation. Developed by iconic UK statistician epidemiologist Austin Bradford Hill, this level of evidence provides what we call causal medical inference, the level of proof we have today for tobacco and lung cancer. The second is called randomized controlled trials, RCTs, where the investigator varies only the one nutrient under study. However, such studies must have a placebo control group to be able to rise to the level of proof. But aside from study design, there is yet another and more prescient reason why these epidemiologic studies, even those that purportedly assess causation, are suspect. They measure what goes in the mouth and assume it's what's absorbed in the intestine and ends up in our bloodstream, which isn't true. Think of what really happens as analogous to eating for two. When pregnant, the mother's intake is wildly increased over baseline. She gains weight, but we don't care because we know about 30% of the energy is going to the growing fetus. Well, even without being pregnant, each of us is always eating for two, because we also have to feed our own intestinal microbiome, which receives and metabolizes about 30% of our ingested nutrients. If the nutrients didn't enter our bloodstream, did we really get them? The discovery of our symbiotic relationship with our intestinal microbiome changed everything. We now know that we have to feed it to stay healthy. When we don't feed it right, for example, depriving it of dietary protein, those bacteria send blood-borne and neural signals that tell our brains to alter our behavior so that they can get the nutrition that they do need. Whether you like it or not, you're eating for two. You're in a symbiotic relationship with your gut, and if you hurt your gut will hurt you back. The argument I'll make throughout the rest of this book is that it's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food that matters. Because the real nutritional question is, who and what are you feeding? Are you feeding the human? Or are you feeding the intestinal microbiome? And is your liver working right based on the share that you get? Based on our current eating paradigm and nutrition facts label, you can't figure either of those two questions out. Who decides what's healthy and for whom? In a population where 88% have some level of metabolic dysfunction, the entire concept of healthy has been obfuscated. And who obfuscated it? All the usual suspects, plus some. The American Heart Association demonized saturated fat. We took the fat out of milk and got cheese and chocolate milk instead. But they're healthy, or so we're told. The American Diabetes Association pushed whole grains, so we foisted whole grain bread on the public, except that as soon as it's milled, it's not whole grain anymore. See Chapter 19. The Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics told people that eggs had cholesterol, so Americans opted for refined carbs like breakfast cereal. But my personal all-time favorite is the U.S. Institute of Medicine, which in 2004 codified an upper limit for added sugar at 25% of total calories. In what universe is 25% of calories as added sugar justifiable? This gave the food industry carte blanche to add as much as they possibly could, making us sicker and sicker. When it comes to food, the only labeling rule is for allergies like eggs, gluten, peanuts, shellfish, and the like, things that can kill people acutely. After that, anything goes. See Chapter 23. Most people trust and buy products based on the way they're promoted on the package, rather than their actual nutritional value, which still means nothing. Because it's not what's in the food, it's what's been done to the food that counts. But that's nowhere to be found on the label. My definition of healthy. The key to fending off chronic disease is to keep those 8 subcellular pathways running right. And each and every one of them can be made to run right with 2 simple dictates. 1. Protect the liver. You have to protect the liver from fructose, glucose, branched-chain amino acids, omega-6 fatty acids, iron, and other oxidative stresses, all of which end up causing fat accumulation and liver damage and generate insulin resistance. This can be done by either reducing the dose of dietary liver stressors, for example, a low-sugar diet, or their flux, for example, a high-fiber diet, which blocks sugar absorption, thus reducing the rate by which fructose and branched-chain amino acids reach the liver. 2. Feed the gut. If you don't feed your microbiome will feed on you. It will literally chew up the mucin layer that protects your intestinal epithelial cells, which increases the risk for leaky gut, inflammation, and more insulin resistance. The goal is to deliver more nutrients farther down the intestine, for example, a high-fiber diet. Fiber is an essential nutrient, not for only you, but also for your microbiome. The fiber in real food is of 2 kinds. Soluble, which is globular, like what holds jelly together, for example, psyllium, pectin, inulin, and insoluble, like the stringy stuff in celery, for example, cellulose, chitin, peptidoglycan. You need both as they do different jobs. And you also need the geometry in order to make fiber work for you. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine a spaghetti colander. You run the water, it goes right through the holes. Now throw a glob of petroleum jelly into the center of the colander. You run the water, it might bounce off the jelly, but it still runs right through the holes. Finally, take your finger and rub the petroleum jelly all throughout the inside of the colander. Now run the water. You have an impenetrable barrier. When fiber, soluble and insoluble, is consumed within food, the insoluble fiber, stringy, forms a lattice work on the inside of the duodenum, while the soluble fiber, globular, plugs the holes in the lattice. Together, along with this geometry, they form an impenetrable barrier along the duodenal wall, which has numerous biological benefits. It's because of this geometry that dietary fiber, when occurring naturally in food and without adulteration, protects against metabolic syndrome by protecting the liver and feeding the gut. Cellulose is an insoluble fiber. Alone it could form the lattice work but not plug the holes. Psyllium is a soluble fiber. It can swell and absorb water but can't lay down the scaffolding. To get the benefits on delay of absorption to protect the liver, you need both. Real food has both. Could you put both into one pill? Perhaps, but the side effect would be highly problematic. Cellulose isn't compressible, so in order to lay down the lattice work, you would have to take a high dose of cellulose. On the other hand, psyllium swells with exposure to water and doesn't release it, causing severe bloating, distress, and diarrhea. It also doesn't absorb macronutrients, just water. On the other hand, intact fiber found in real food has many benefits, and not just short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs. In the processed food industry, the germ of the grain, the nucleic acids, flavonoids, polyphenols, is removed along with the fiber because they can go rancid. See Chapter 19. Protecting the liver means maintaining the fiber and keeping the germ intact as well. 2 simple precepts. Protect the liver, feed the gut. Real food, low sugar, high fiber, does both. Processed food, high sugar, low fiber, does neither. Processed food is the primary suspect in our current health and healthcare debacle because it doesn't improve our 8 subcellular pathologies, our 3 nutrient-sensing enzymes, and our 2 physiologic precepts.